guys, I'm Actual Vision and welcome to a very special sim racing show. I am joined here by David Perel. He is the 2017 Blancpain GT champion, ×3 championships, Spa 24 class winner ×2. He's a racing driver in a Ferrari GT3s. That's incredible. Like, everyone wants to just drive a Ferrari, let alone race one. He loves a bit of tech. He's a handy sim racer. And of course, we know that he is a YouTuber as well. How you doing, David? Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and I am genuinely looking forward to having this discussion. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it caused a bit of a stir this week within the sim racing community with a tweet here. I'll read the tweet out in its entirety. It's probably the best way to start with some context. This week you tweeted out, GT Sport players complaining about the new FIA Gran Turismo schedule is definitely triggering me. Top complaints: number 1, limited entries; 2, an intense qualifying schedule; 3, no prize money; 4, no social life. So I'm going to just open up the thread so we can get all of this information here. And you continue to say, let's be clear, Gran Turismo does not owe you anything. We are lucky these competitions even exist. If you want a social life, then by all means have one. But becoming a world champion, anything requires a mental level of dedication and sacrifice. There's no such thing as work-life balance when trying to become a world champion. Just ask any world champion. No prize money? Oh my God, cry me a river. It took me 18 years to earn $1 from motorsport. How much do you have to spend to become a GT Sport World Champion? Less than 1% of real racing, and you don't even have to leave your house in the qualifying stages. Goes to show that in order to become the best, you first need to outlast your competition. Talent is 1% of the game, and even if you have the talent, no one owes you a thing. You have already been gifted one of the most important ingredients. It's up to you to maximize that advantage by working just as hard as those without the same talent. Don't complain when the barrier to entry is high. That's the point. To those who are willing to make sacrifices and look past the rewards, your task just became a bit easier. So that's a full tweet there, David. I'm glad that you held back, because if you really said what you thought, that could have been really crazy. But give us a little explanation as to what you. Oh, I guess it pretty much explains itself there. But yeah, for the people watching right now, a little explanation as to where this came about and why you put this on the old Twitter sphere.
Just to be clear on one thing, I didn't kind of hold back at all. That is my entire opinion. What I do wish I added as a little caveat is that I don't expect sim racers to race for free. I'm a big believer that sim racers are actually underpaid at the moment. But what I didn't like seeing was the amount of sim racers who almost felt entitled that they should be getting prize money from the competition organizers. There's tons of examples in the real world where that is not the case. Especially with games like Gran Turismo, they were one of the first to sort of bridge the gap between sim racing and real racing, and we will get into that argument in a minute. And I felt like a lot of the people see Gran Turismo as the end game, getting to the World Championship and being a world champion as the end game, which they should be rewarded for, which I've always perceived GT Sport or any of these sim events as more of a platform for aspiring racing drivers. So I still think that games like Gran Turismo, and it's not just Gran Turismo, it's also iRacing, etc., and ACC, they do a lot for sim racers who are looking to cross over to the real thing. In this case of GT Sport, they already fly you to the events for free. You have the hotel for free. The winners do actually get something. It's just not a cash prize. You can sell that tag watch if you want. It's worth something. And I don't know. It felt to me like, first of all, the people who are complaining, it's almost like as if they're guaranteed to get to the GT Sport World Finals. I don't think that's a fair assumption entirely, but I don't like it when people complain necessarily that they have to work hard in order to achieve something. And I've always had a problem when people complain that they're not getting rewarded in terms of money. And this also could be related to the amount of emails I get every week from people who are saying, how much does a racing driver earn because I want to become a racing driver? To become a racing driver, you should never be worrying about the money. You're never going to make any. There's very few people who do become professional. And even then, the money invested in you to become professional is never really balanced out by the salary that you're earning. Of course, there are exceptions to that. Of course, there are. But because I've been through that process, because I've you know, had something, then had nothing, then had something again. I felt like something had to be said, that nothing is owed to us beyond the fact that these events are being held for us to prove our talent. And I just took exception to it this time when everyone complained, especially like about limited entries and no prize money. Those things in particular, just I had to say something.
Yeah, of course, everyone's entitled to their opinion. That's the beauty of just the beauty of the world. If we were all exactly the same, it'd be a very boring place to live. That's for sure. My first point to pick at here is you say that these should be looked at as a platform into real racing, and also I saw that you put 95% of sim racers wanting to become real racing drivers. That is not the case, not in my opinion. For me, I've been involved in this scene for since it started to become big. Really, I was kind of quite lucky, and for me personally, like, people ask me this question as a commentator: oh, when are you going to finally step it up into the real world racing? Like, I'm not. That doesn't interest me. If I get an opportunity, I would probably. It's a job at the end of the day. But sim racing is my end goal. This is what I really enjoy. This is what I love. I'm a nerd for it. I'm a self-proclaimed nerd for it. I don't think that 95% of people want to become a real racing driver. I think that is a very inflated stat there. I would say, and I actually had a conversation with Mikhail Hizal yesterday, the GT Sport World Champion. So I've got a bit of an insight into how tough it is to qualify for these events. I would say it's a 50-50 split. I feel like now, most competitions, half the competitions now have prize money as a carrot.
Incentive.
It's incentive. That's the word. Sorry. And that's what these drivers are looking to be, the best sim racer in the world. Like, that is a viable option now. For me personally, I think that's what half of these drivers are looking at. And of course, there's half of them as well that want to become real racing drivers. I know loads of them, and for some of them it's both. So I think the 95% of everyone who's in sim racing, for someone who runs a community that's got 2,500 drivers, I can tell you that's definitely not the case.
It's fair to say that I did probably hyperbolize that number, but I've also met Mikhail, for example. I've actually met a number of the GT Sport drivers because I have been at one of the events.
Yeah.
I've invited them to sit in my car at separate events as well. And all of them walk away wishing that they could be in that car. And I know also that for sure that some sim racers want to just become the sim racing world champion. And frankly, honestly, I would have loved when I was younger, when I had much more time to dedicate just to the art, the craft of sim racing. I would have given anything to be a world champion in sim racing. But a lot of them, if you said to them, okay, now that you're world champion in sim racing, would you like to try a GT car or a Formula car? I think that it would be more than half who would say, I would love to try that and experience the crossover. So maybe their ultimate goal is not to become real racing drivers, and it's fair to say that I inflated that number, which was just a reply to someone else. And there's, of course, the argument to just focus on becoming a professional sim racer on its own. That on its own is just as difficult. But I still feel like not every event necessarily has to give out prize money. They are not responsible for the living, for the racing drivers or sim racers, making a living from their passion. So my point still remains on the obligation of the organizers to give prize money. It's not the obligation. I still think that would probably fall upon the teams and sponsors that some of the drivers race for. Now, of course, in the case of Gran Turismo, they don't actually allow sponsors on the car or for the drivers to wear sponsorship jerseys. But that's the same case at other real-life events as well. So it's not unprecedented.
The first point you made there about sim racers sitting in your car, of course, if you gave them the opportunity to drive the GT3 car, of course they would. But that's like the same as if someone winning a FIFA World Championships being told you can now go and play alongside Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi in a training session. Like, they would do it. They would 100% do it, but they wouldn't be good enough to.
I agree with you, but let's be honest with just one thing on that point. The crossover from sim racing to real racing is probably in the sim world, in the esports world, is probably for now, maybe besides shooting games, the only real crossover that you have where there is a genuine blurred line. If a FIFA player is not necessarily going to be a good footballer, but there is genuine probability that a good sim racer can be a good real racer.
I will agree with you on that. I think
Yeah.
I think it's the only one really that
Yeah.
that you can really compare it in terms of esports. Like another thing for sim racing esports is it's the only esport where you have a direct effect on someone else's performance in terms of contact with them in the corner, where you can break the rules. Whereas in FIFA you're supposed to score more goals than the other guy. Call of Duty you're supposed to kill people.
Right. Yes.
So it's the most unique esport. For me out there in terms of, so we're talking GT Sport specifically here. I'm looking
in this case, yes, but
Yeah.
you know, I think the SRO events, the ACC events, they also don't have prize money, so
No.
that's another example.
Of course, yeah. So we we talk GT Sport here, but me and you are going to generalize if we like. Well, I am anyway.
Perhaps, yeah, I'm open to generalizing.
So you've got GT Sport. It's the production value of those shows is absolutely incredible.
Yes.
But it's the qualifying process. So I was talking to Mikhail yesterday. 80 races to qualify effectively. You'd need to do 80 races to maximize your chances of qualifying for one of the World Tour events.
If you choose to do both manufacturers and nations, correct?
Yeah, that is
okay.
correct.
So you can choose to do one and become a specialist at one of them.
Yeah, of course, but that's still 40 races. So I was discussing, I'm 33, I've got 3 children, so if I had the talent to be at that level, I have bills to pay, I have children to look after, I wouldn't be able to commit that much time to be able to qualify for these events. So effectively it blackballs a lot of the percentage of potential drivers in this instance, and it becomes sort of, there's a demographic for between sort of 16 to sort of 21, people who are maybe in education, people who haven't really quite found out what they're going to do in the real world in terms of jobs. That's how I see there's being a problem. So for me, with how much the money's being put into the production of these events, and I'm no financial guru in terms of these, but I would say that they're close to $1 million each for sure.
That's what I've heard, yes.
Yeah, so why isn't 50,000 taken from that and just to dial down a little bit to ensure the futures of potentially the top 3 drivers in this, where if they win the world finals, they are covered for a whole year, where they can just concentrate on being the best in the world within that game. So I work with Logitech G Challenge. That is across multiple games. It is an amateur competition. It's stated from the start. This is the platform to then become a professional sim racer. With GT Sport, you are the best at that specific game. It's their world championships. So wouldn't it not be beneficial to the people who, to Polyphony Studios, to Sony, to ensure the futures of these drivers, give them that year where they can then become a content creator, they can put like 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day into practice, so the talent indeed at the top level grows, it gets better and better and better, the product becomes better, but also there's a carrot there for more people to get involved because they can genuinely see an end goal, and if they are successful, that can cover them from what they're doing currently in life. Like there is a genuine possibility for that to be their job.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that premise, but I just don't see why it's necessary or why it's an obligation from GT Sports side. I'll again revert to, when I revert to real racing, it's not to say that these sim races have to be real races in the context of this conversation. I wish I was a bit more clear in my tweet, but now I have the opportunity here. I'm just going to use real world examples, physical world examples, where that kind of premise is idealistic, but it's not necessarily the reality of what goes down. So, for example, when I was growing up, I did karting from the age of 15 to 23, and the incentive there was, at least in South Africa, the biggest series was the Rotax Max series, and 64 countries qualified for the World Finals, and Rotax provided your flights, kart, and engine at the World Finals. But in order to get there, you had to become a national champion. So obviously some regions were more competitive than others, and it just so happened that South Africa had the most competitive region, where between 2000 and 2006 there was 5 world champions from South Africa. So to become a national champion in South Africa, you effectively had to beat 5 world champions. It was like the ultimate world championship. Even then,
madness,
yeah. So then you'd win the ticket, and bear in mind you had to spend, I don't know how much money, between 20 and 50,000 pounds to become a national champion. Then you'd get flown over to Italy, let's just say, and compete in the World Championships. And then if you won the World Championship, all you got was a trophy and a good mark on your CV, if you will. So that's kind of the culture that I came from. And when I was lucky enough to qualify for the World Championships. I did it when I was 23. And at the time, I had a full-time job, working 9 to 5. I had to take time off. And yes, it was my own company, which I was working for. But there's still obligations that I had to go through my day to day, and then still do racing on the side. So that's true for almost every walks of life. So, in your case, you have a family, you have kids, you also have the ability to be a very fast and successful sim racer. But unfortunately, it's not always the case where, we just get everything laid out in front of us in a nice and smooth and unrestricted way, to pursue our dream of becoming a world champion. There are sacrifices that we have to make. So in this case, you're right. There's a lot of time that has to be dedicated to winning those FIA qualifying races, no question. But if you had a day job and still wanted to become a professional at anything else, like, again, I'll just use an example for racing. I have to do my day job. I have to go to gym. I have to find time for gym. And as you climb the ladder, you have to find more time for gym. You have to find time to eat the right things and still behave in the right way, even though you're fasting and you're grumpy as hell. There's a lot of compromises that we all have to make as aspiring professionals along the way before we actually cross that line to earning money. Now, in sim racing, in some competitions, there is prize money and stuff. So there's almost like, for example, if you do the Forza stuff, am I correct that the esports, the the Le Mans series this year is 200,000 prize pool?
200 or 250,000.
Yeah, it's significant, no question. But so that's one of the good examples where there is prize money, and more power to them, and more power to those sim racers who can win that money. I'm a big believer that sim racers do deserve to make money. I don't see why it's the obligation of the organizers to do so, because especially in the sim racing world, just out of interest, do you know if the teams or drivers have to pay an entry fee for the Le Mans esports?
Can
they race for free?
It's, again, it's not 100% information from me, so don't quote me on this.
Okay.
It's a qualifying series. There's opportunities to qualify for it, but there are wildcard entrants which I believe are paid for.
Okay.
So don't quote me on it, but yeah,
no, that's fair enough.
I believe it's paid for, which is that's another conversation in the whole anyway, isn't it? That's like that people are going to be pissed with that and people are going to be happy with that. I guess it depends on what side of the fence.
I suppose it's a filter of sorry, just to go back to my point. The point is that there's always going to be compromises along the way, and there's often going to be no guarantee that what we're pursuing will be something that we can achieve. So in the case of the Gran Turismo qualifiers, and let's again just focus on GT Sport, you have to do the 40 to 80 races to qualify. But it's still in your own home. Not all those FIA drivers are dedicating 8-10 hours a day. A lot of them are already dedicating that time, regardless of what the qualifying schedule is. I mean, I'm pretty sure you've heard of the stories of guys dedicating 10 hours a day to sim racing practice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they could allocate that time accordingly to ACC, iRacing, GT Sports, and Forza, for those of you who want to put their focus into all four disciplines. But I don't see what changes now. Previously, you were putting the 10 hours in, and you and I, who didn't have that time, were still competing against those guys, whether we had families or not, or day jobs or not. The only difference now is that Gran Turismo said, well, okay, part of that time allocation is now dedicated to actually competing online. You also have the choice, of course, not to do all 3 races in the evening. You could do one. Like in real life, we only get one shot at a race, let's just say. So I don't see it so clearly as black and white. That's why I said to become a world champion at anything takes insane levels of dedication and sacrifice. And there are people who just want to get there to participate. I've been guilty of the same thing. I just want to qualify for the GT World Championships. I've never actually thought I want to be the world champion. But at the same time, if you want to compete at that level, it's not going to be a cakewalk, and you can't just have your normal life and then the cherry on top to compete at these events. Whether you earn money from them or not, I understand, but that's still a different story, correct?
Yeah, no, do you know, I agree with a lot of what you're saying there. There's one thing that I will pick at. So
Sure.
within the GT Sport World Championships or the tour events they have, there's no mention of the teams they drive for. Like you said, there's no mention of the sponsors of those teams. So for the responsibility to pay the drivers to fall on the teams becomes, well, a very grey area, a very tough area for each team as well. So because the Gran Turismo have taken that away from these drivers, it's almost like they've taken the personality away from the drivers as well, because in the Nations Cup, their names don't even get mentioned. Like, it's
the Nations Cup. It's the same in Rotax.
Of course, right.
But it was South Africa versus America, and it drove me nuts.
Well,
I agree with
I'm
you.
glad we agree on that one then. So then how do the teams make money from these events? How do they get the exposure from these events? So Gran Turismo, for me, obviously, these tour events are a marketing ploy to sell the game. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to sell Gran Turismo Sport. There's no other way why they're doing this.
No question.
So so you've got the casters, of course they should be being paid. You've got the production staff, that's of course they should be being paid. You've got Gran Turismo making money from these events, of course they should be, because that's...
I'm sure Puma is paying money, Tag is paying money.
Exactly that. So why is it that the people that we're watching are for me, production-wise, this is the biggest competition in the world. This is how I look at it from someone who is just a nerd for this stuff. I love it.
Me too.
Why are
I want to make that clear. I'm a massive fan about all these things. I'm not anti-sim racing.
No, of course.
I'm obsessed.
Everyone loves you in the sim racing world, apart from this week, so you'll be fine. Now you're the pantomime villain right now.
Yeah, for sure. So I understand why. I completely understand why.
So now Gran Turismo have put that wall from the teams not being able to gain the exposure, the teams' sponsors, those are the people who, like you said, teams should be paying their drivers. They've got no incentive to pay their drivers for these specific events because that is not the case. They get no exposure at all from this.
Okay, can I interject if you don't mind?
Well, I'll just finish my point. So why are the drivers the only people that are not compensated for this?
Right. Okay. So this is a bit. It's meta. Okay. It's not perhaps not the most fair comparison, but let's use it for the sake of this argument. The Olympics, and I know Gran Turismo is not the Olympics, but it's the official FIA sanctioned sim racing event. Okay, so let's just say in that context, and with the fact that they call it the Nations Cup, even maybe we can argue that to death. I'm probably going to agree with you on that one. But anyway, you could argue that in the context of sim racing, and because it's the only FIA sanctioned event, this is their version of the Olympics. Let's just use it for the sake of my argument here, and you can shoot me down afterwards. Totally open. The Olympics, the runners, the jumpers, the swimmers are not allowed to wear any branded clothing that associates them to their sponsor. Of course, the runners wear shoes with the Nike tick on it, but you don't see Usain Bolt sponsored by Puma on the board or anything, etc. The winners don't win any prize money except for their gold medal, which they can sell for money. However, there are those runners and competitors are incentivized by their country and by their sponsors. The sponsors then use the achievement of their competitors from these large-scale events to market them post-event as winners, as qualifiers, as competitors, etc. Gran Turismo is the biggest platform for all the names that we see in that event. To be honest with you, I didn't know about Mikhail until he won, until he started dominating in the Gran Turismo events. I would argue that Gran Turismo needs to do a better job of promoting the username. Alternatively, I would argue that the drivers need to rename their pseudonyms, their PSN IDs, to their actual names, like I've done. The reason I call Gran Turismo Sport a platform, it's not just to become necessarily a real racing driver, but because it is, as we both agree, would you say it's probably the most watched live sim racing competition at the moment? Or was that an unfair estimate?
Yeah, it's up there. That and F1 esports, because that's
Right.
Sky Sports actually put that on their actual channel.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Okay, so
Yeah,
it's one of
yeah, of course.
let's say it's one of
Sorry,
the.
I'm being facetious there. Yeah, it is.
No, it's
Let's just say
totally.
yes.
I understand. So these drivers have a massive platform. The teams themselves have a massive platform. What's stopping the teams? And I'm just going to say, as a marketing example here, from promoting non-stop from the day that the GT Sport event starts to the day it ends, and then post the event, promoting their drivers who are now competing in the event itself.
Yeah.
A lot of the people who are racing have a big following in forums, in Discord, on Twitter. There's an ample opportunity for all of us to use the platform. The fact that we're there, we can live stream, live tweet, live YouTube, all of our actions around the event to say that we are competing in probably, it's fair to say, one of the most competitive sim racing events, given the low barrier to entry, given the amount of people who play Gran Turismo sports, etc. And then the winner on top of that, it's like winning in the FIA world a gold medal for sim racing, which they could then market post-event. And, Mikhail is a great example of that. He's become very popular. Igor Fraga is also one who's become very popular through post-marketing, not necessarily what they achieve on the day, which receives a massive amount of coverage. And it's fair. I completely understand. Why can't they at least wear a t-shirt which has Puma and tag and their team name? I understand that. But the teams can also do much more to promote their drivers around the event. And if I was a team owner, and I do hope to be a team owner one day, I would love for one or two of my drivers to be in that event, and I would go absolutely marketing crazy around it. So there's my argument on that subject.
Yeah, well, yeah, the Olympics is a very, very good example in that respect.
I know it's a bit of an unfair comparison, but
it makes sense.
It's still
it's very comparable.
thing.
It really is. I kind of understand what you're saying there in terms of if you treat GT Sport as its own entity as much as the Olympics. Of course, it's different scales, but yeah, you're all the best within that organisation, and with the Olympics, you're the best within that organisation. I understand that, but I still feel that GT Sport should be a lot more open to these things. GT Sport, from day one, from when I first started playing it back in the day, Gran Turismo.
Gran Turismo 1.
It's just been like
DualShock remote.
It's always been
Actually,
our
no,
way or the highway. Like they're such a traditionalist company, and obviously it's worked for them in terms of how successful they've become. But is it not a time now for them to wake up and realise, do you know what, we could do a lot more here to ensure the futures of our stars, because they are their stars. If GT Sport are producing these talents, and if you say it's a platform for these drivers to indeed shoot to the stars with their social media, with their ability, with their talent, can GT Sport do more to ensure that these drivers, not only they become a world champion, they can work from that, but they are able to come back the next year, with a whole year practice behind them. They're going to get better. The product's going to get better because all of the drivers are insured, if you like, or compensated for the time that they're going to be given. And it's a big full circle here. Like, they will get a better product for us to watch. The drivers will be in a better position.
Sorry to cut in. These drivers, they probably sign agreements that Gran Turismo can use their name to market further, right? I'm pretty sure they have to sign something like that.
I've never seen that in sim racing, if I'm honest with you.
I know, but I mean, Gran Turismo is at a massive scale, and they have Sony behind them and stuff. So, where am I going with this? The drivers themselves still race for individual teams. I don't see why it's the obligation of Gran Turismo, which provides them with a massive platform, to pay them as well. It's like Formula One would be paying Lewis Hamilton, and they don't. They pay the teams. I know that, but it's kind of in a backwards way. It's the same with the SRO. In the SRO events, the teams win prize money, those checks that you see us hold up.
Yeah.
But the entry fee is monstrous for these to get into these events. So you're effectively getting your own entry fee back, if you will. I just don't see why. I do understand the argument that these events should be giving out prize money, but not as an obligation to keep this sim racer alive for the next year. The counter argument to that could be...
That's my opinion, by the way.
No, of course. It's actually a lot of opinion, because that's what we've seen on my response on Twitter. Another argument could be that, well, why should the top 3 guys get money for a year to survive, and then everyone else who has to balance work and life now has to compete against those 3 winners who just dedicated a year to Gran Turismo for the next year's event? Already there's an unfair advantage, which is being perpetuated by Gran Turismo itself. I still think that it's up to the driver to... Is a driver the right way to say it, would you say? Sim racer.
I'd say driver. Yeah, I think we're at the point now
I think it's up to the driver, just like it is in the real world. You know, when you wake up and you say I want to be a racing driver, there's not a manager waiting for you at the door, by the way. You know, you have to do everything yourself until you've gotten to a point where you've proven yourself consistent enough and blah, 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 that people are willing to back you, whether it be a sponsor, whether it be a manager or a team. Winning one Gran Turismo World Championship is not necessarily a guarantee that, or let's not say World Championship, let's say one Gran Turismo event is necessarily a guarantee that you're going to continue winning. Could have just been your day. So, and Gran Turismo itself has already done a huge amount previously to back the talent that they believe can go to another level. Now, no, in this context, it's, again, I'm sorry, I'm crossing over to real racing, but if you look at Igor Fraga, if you look at Ordonez or Wolfgang Reip or Mardenborough, they were backed by, in one case, Nissan, but also by Gran Turismo. And I think they did phenomenal things but to prove that there is a real crossover from sim racing to real racing. I think they were probably the first ones to take it seriously and make a project out of it to try and get... I know in the case of Jan, they actually tried to get him to Formula 1. Didn't quite get there. He landed in Super GT, poor guy. But which other sim racing competition does that kind of thing for their drivers afterwards? I mean, even the marketing around the winners afterwards is actually pretty impressive as well. And again, that's another leverage point for the drivers and the teams to use as a tool to get more sponsors, etc. Because that driver, after they've won a Gran Turismo World Championship, doesn't necessarily just have to play Gran Turismo. They can branch out to the other prize-winning events, correct or not?
You're spot on. Like, so I am fully on board with this. Like, the competitions I work on, I just want them to look after the drivers afterwards. For the next 3 months, you should be banging these names out on social media, left, right, and center. And it's marketing naivety more than anything. Like, what GT Sport are doing is spot on. Like, they're doing the replays of the race as if it was live again a month later. 6 months after an event, let's say in Salzburg, for argument's sake here, they'd be like, oh, yes, remember this battle between da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and it, they're doing an absolutely stellar job of that. So I completely agree, and I think there was a misconception with your tweet. We spoke about this before we actually went live here, that I think it was just a misunderstanding for the most part of what you've written. And for someone like myself, I understand that Formula 1 don't pay the drivers in these championships. I understand that they earn their salary from their teams. Obviously, sim racing isn't really at that point yet in terms of teams being able to pay their drivers as much as what real life motorsport does. So, and again, I'm in agreement.
You're right.
With you. I'm now agreeing with you on this term. But I don't think people expect GT Sport to pay the drivers per se. I think that we're just in a position now where we want there to be prize money. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
I don't think there's like you say, there's demanding of money. I just think we just want it. Like, again, you guys want more money, of course.
Who doesn't? I would love to win 100,000 euros in a sim racing championship. Trust me.
Yeah, but I think that the word you used of demanding, I don't think that's quite the case. I just think it's more of a wish, if you like.
I would go a little bit further and say that there's becoming an expectation. And it could be starting to get some cultural momentum because other competitions are offering prize money.
But that's a good thing. For me, in my personal opinion, that expectation because of other competitions.
It's a competitive element between the competitions to incentivize 100%. But Gran Turismo first of all, I think they got ahead of everyone else, starting with the GT Academy.
That was amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm in the worst position out of all the guys because I come from South Africa. I don't qualify, and in 2000 and
is that still a thing?
Correct? What? Yes, it's still a thing.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
In 2009, I believe, when the second GT Academy event was released online, it was with the Nissans at Indianapolis, and there was two. There was in a road car and a race car, and At that point, about 6 months earlier, I had officially run out of every single dollar and couch that I could sell to continue my racing career. And I saw GT Academy as my final little leg in, or foot in the door. And it was over December, so they put time into consideration, although bless the people who had families and wanted to go on holiday. And I dedicated quite literally the entirety of my December holiday, it wasn't really a holiday, to just playing Gran Turismo 10 hours a day. And in the end, I think I was 5th overall on the international leaderboards. Or the EMEA leaderboards. I was 5th overall. And I actually, at the time, I didn't read the rules properly. I didn't know that I wasn't going to get an invite. And I sat there waiting for the invite to the next qualifying rounds, the knockouts and the live events. And nothing ever came. And then I read in detail, South Africa was not eligible. So that sucked. But I still saw that already back then, Gran Turismo was trying to bridge the gap and trying to create a sport out of a video game. And of course, it had already been done in fighting and shooting games. I understand that. But in the sim racing world, that was still quite unique. And that's maybe what I meant with Gran Turismo doesn't necessarily owe us anything. Because they already was such a major influence on this world that we live in now. So again, I want to emphasize, I don't think that sim racers should not earn money. That is not my point. Maybe if I articulate more, it's more that earning money in any of these sports is not easy. And it's not owed to us. It has to be earned. And winning even one world championship does not guarantee that you should be earning any money, because being talented is one element, but are you a professional? Do you represent the brand correctly? Are you a constant troll who's just swearing in interviews? Then you should not be paid by any brands. Because at the end of the day, the people who pay us, whether you're in athletics, sim racing, real racing, or your normal job, you have to be a professional and represent the brand in a way that they like. That's why they're paying you. They're paying you to benefit themselves, right or wrong?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Like, I think this is a great insight from you. Again, it's so difficult to get your point across on things like Twitter with text, because
of course,
there's no context to it in terms of what your tone is, and you can't really explain yourself in text. So to actually hear
it's fair to say that I was irritated when I was writing that tweet, because my Twitter stream, because my Twitter stream was flooded with guys complaining that they had to dedicate so much time to qualifying for the world events. And to me, I still am irritated by that one element, because to qualify for the world events is not meant to be a walk in the park. The world event is, am I correct? It's 21 qualifiers now, 24 qualifiers now.
If that one means of the two, it's a lot.
Yes, it's between 20 and 40. Okay, there's 9 million registered players on Gran Turismo. I don't know how many are active. Let's say under 1 million, still a significant amount. Of course, you need to work hard to be one of those qualifiers. That is the point of a world championship. Should they get paid? Absolutely. Should they get paid by the event organizer? I don't think so. I don't think it's a requirement by them. Should there be prize money? It would be awesome if there was prize money, but there's not only prize money which any driver or team can leverage. And Gran Turismo maybe doesn't give you prize money, but it gives you more exposure than anyone else. You get invited to those FIA galas in front of a lot of real world racing teams, which are now forming sim racing teams. There's a lot of things around actual physical cash, which, by the way, some of these guys could just waste. It's like winning the lottery. And so I'm not saying for one second that everyone here is bad at managing their finances. Please don't take it out of context. I'm just saying money is not the only reward that you should be getting as a racing driver or sim racer. Gran Turismo already pays for everyone to get there. You play it from your home, like all sim racing games. And a little bit of hard work didn't kill anyone. The sacrifices is what eventually breaks people. It's not actually the hard work. A lot of people are willing to work very hard, but the difference always comes in on the sacrifice side. And to be honest with you, I get, again, a lot of sim racing emails who want to become real racing drivers. And I'm like, well, are you willing to sell your dog to get there? Because quite frankly, you may have to get to that point, you know? And I maybe come from an idealistic or puristic point of view where to become world champion, you have to do whatever it takes. But I've kind of always loved that element of sport. And sim racing is a sport, it's a competition. And I mean, I'm just veering off slightly. I promise to bring this back. But I also got in trouble when I supported the move of Igor Fraga in Eau Rouge between himself and Mikel Ezel. I felt that it was cutthroat, and I found it ironic that when they interviewed the drivers at the live event who were also commentators, they were like, I don't see anything wrong here. But the sim racing world blew up, so I know that I have often got contrary views.
We discussed that in depth yesterday, actually, me and Mikhail, because I did a drive. Basically, I've got a series called Driver Spotlight, so we talked about his career, basically.
Yes.
And my take on it was that that's the difference between real motorsport and sim racing. He would never make that move in a real car, but in sim racing, it's not deemed acceptable. But yeah, like you said, the sim racing world went absolutely ballistic. And for me, I was like, we needed this. Like, this is what we need for it to grow.
It was definitely a good thing from a marketing point of view, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, that's the beauty of opinions. We can all have different opinions.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of it.
So, unfortunately, we need another podcast to discuss that move on its own. I would love to discuss that move in detail with people. I've tried on my live stream. It's never worked.
I think me and you need to talk just specifically about sim racing at some point as well, I think.
Yeah. I mean, this isn't my only opinion, but it's more, here's the premise of my complaint. You want to qualify for a world championship, that's going to take hard work. You want to qualify for a world championship, it's going to take a lot of sacrifice. You want to be a world champion, don't try to be a world champion because of the money, be a world champion because you are the world champion. There's nothing wrong with wanting to earn money from our profession or our desired profession. But there's also no obligation from the organizer of the event to pay you. And there's no obligation for them to actually give you cash. Again, you're welcome to sell that tag watch. I'm sure it's worth between 5 and 10 grand. It's not insignificant. And there's precedent amongst many disciplines across the world on a competitive level where you are not paid to compete. Women's cycling is a prime example of that, by the way. I mean, those ladies have to have a normal job and still work and still train like crazy. Same with a lot of professional swimmers, professional pool players, professional racing drivers themselves, because the way that we're paid is actually per race. So if you can call yourself a professional racing driver, but you only do 5 races a year, guess what? You need a job, and you need to exercise like crazy, and you need to do sim racing like crazy, and on top of all those things, and a lot of those guys also have families and stuff. So it's never easy. And I just don't, I'm sorry, I apologize. And I'd hate it when people complain that it's getting more difficult. It's like, well, it's the world championships.
The bigger it gets, the more difficult it's going to get. I completely agree with you on that. And if it doesn't, there's something
world
completely wrong.
championships. Yeah. So I understand, again, why they want to be paid. And I understand why the teams complain. But, I almost said something that I didn't mean. But there's other ways to leverage that marketing opportunity to earn more money in the future, etc. So there you go. There's my argument. And I'm sorry I offended people. That wasn't my intention, but I knew I would upset someone.
Well, that's what. As soon as you said let's do a podcast, I thought, yeah, we need to do this, because I kind of understood what you were trying to say, but it came across, again, it's just text, isn't it? It's just the way it is. Like the amount of times I've fallen out with my missus over text when I was just trying to be nice, you know what I mean? Actually,
yeah.
Like that could be done in voice as well, actually. But yeah, so do you know what? I feel like we're just going to keep going around in circles with this specific topic. What I want to sort of move on to very, very briefly is, obviously you had your struggles to get into real world motorsports, to reach that top level, and obviously by your story you've done it via talent. There's a problem in the real world
not
where
that much talent.
Well, you must have talent to be a champion, mate. Don't do yourself a disservice.
No, I'll explain the talent paradox in a second. Please finish your point, please.
But we're in a very, very unique situation with sim racing where anybody and everybody can reach that top level, right?
Yes. The barrier to entry is very low,
exactly,
which is beautiful.
Exactly that. So looking at Formula One, that's the pinnacle of, for me personally, that's the pinnacle of motorsport. Formula One. I agree. Where allegedly the best 20 drivers in the world. How many of those 20 drivers in Formula One are the actual 20 best drivers?
Okay, so Well,
That's not.
do we have enough time?
It's more of a rhetorical question in the
I would-
fact of the people who qualify for a sim racing event. They are that. If 30 people qualify, they are the 30 best. Whereas this is how unique sim racing is. This is the position we are in right now. So bring it back to sort of money. I'm agreeing with you. Like, there's no obligation for these companies to be paying money. But then when there's companies like Le Mans Esport putting money into their, like, we've got the ADAX sim racing series as well, which is 80,000 euros.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Like, I just don't think.
But how many people watch those series compared to GT Sport?
Exactly. That's kind of that's why people are so confused.
I understand.
Why are people getting paid such and such for this competition where that X amount of people's watching, and then you get something that's 10 times as many people watching, and there's no money involved at all. I think that's where the confusion is here. Again, it's hard for people to put their points across over Twitter. If only we could have a podcast with 400,000 people in there talking. But yeah, I think you can understand what I mean by that.
Yes. If you don't mind me elaborating a little bit on this, let's talk about the talent thing. I obviously have some talent to be a racing driver. There's no question. But to be good at racing, sim racing or real racing, you have to have talent. That is table stakes. If you don't have the talent, you can't even get to the table. What makes the difference is everything around your talent. Your dedication, your hard work, your professionalism, your sacrifice. Those are the things which make you into a professional. And in some cases, make you into a world champion. And sim racing is probably the purest form of a talent or meritocracy, but it still has its pitfalls. Because I know that I could be more consistent in the top tier of, let's just say, Gran Turismo if I had more time to dedicate to it, because I have dedicated that time to it before and proven that I can be one of the fastest in the world. But it took so much practice. Now, let's say the top 30 qualifiers, of them, I would argue that someone like Mikhail has unbelievable natural talent and an insane sense of timing that is so well suited to Gran Turismo that he is able to dominate and still perform his studies. Whereas someone else, I'm going to use Cody as an example because he's admitted this to us many times.
Yeah.
He's a hard worker. So he's dedicated more time to the game to become as fast as a natural talent like Mikhail. I love that sim racing. More than that, it's probably the most meritocracy, whatever the case is, whatever the word is. The barrier to entry is so low because to get into just karting, you need at least £3,000 or euros for a new chassis and engine. And guess what? You're going to be replacing the engine every race. So you need about 6 new engines in a season, or 3 at least. And you need 2 new chassis, and you need a set of tires for every day, which is about 250 to 350 euros. That's the cheapest form of motorsport.
Yeah,
So
sorry.
the barrier there is massive. Whereas with Gran Turismo, with ACC, with iRacing, you can win those things with the Logitech G29. You can. There's been so many examples of people winning it with average equipment.
Great work.
That's the beauty of it. But it still requires a shit ton, excuse my language, of time, dedication, and practice. That's still going to be a big differentiator between those who qualify and those who don't, even if they have the equal amount of talent.
Yeah, so for me personally, I see sim racing and the real world stuff, as I did sort of allude to at the start, as 2 separate entities. Why can't sim racing be? Why can't it break the stigma of the real world motorsport? Why can't it become its own entity in terms of the sponsorships for prize money? Effectively, this is what I'm trying to battle for drivers. I want to see it be self-sustainable. It's a lot cheaper to put on a sim racing event than it is to put on a motorsport event as well.
Oh yeah, probably 3 times cheaper, because I know, like, for example, the motorsport games was in the region of 50,000 euros or something to put on, something like that.
But not every competition is bloody GT Sport theatre level scene.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Absolutely,
it doesn't. As much as it's amazing, it doesn't have to be that elaborate. It's pretty crazy. And don't get me wrong, I lap up every minute of it. It's fine.
It was brilliant to see. It was brilliant.
It's sensational. Like there is nothing out there like it.
I was at I don't know if you were at the motorsport, at the Autosport International, the motorsport games that they had there with the Le Mans Esports.
Stuff like this.
I went there on my own. bought a ticket.
I was there the year before. Actually, I
Yes.
did the Project Cars 2 World Championship.
Yes,
announcement.
yes. I think we may have met in person back then. But anyway, um, the event last year was quiet, and this year there was like maybe 500 spectators. And I'll never forget, like the first time it hit me, the step that sim racing is making
Yes.
was that in the final they used GT40s at Le Mans. And the GT40s first and second place was early on in the race. They were fighting for the lead, and they came drifting sideways with a really nice camera angle. I know it was Forza, whatever.
There's only one camera angle that's good in that game, and it's that specific track and that specific corner, so you're lucky.
Yes. So they were like fully loaded, a little bit of like angle on the drift, but still well in control. And the crowd, who were not sim racing fans, they were Autosport International attendees, literally went, oh!
Yeah, that's it.
Like that was exciting. And I was like, you're joking. What have I just seen? This is significant. Because it finally is tapped over to, it's not just a video game, like there is an emotion we can tap into.
We had this last year in Germany for the European, so the Logitech G Challenge is an amateur competition, as I've stated.
Yes.
And there's 4 regional finals in 4 different continents. And we did the European one in Cologne, Germany, at the Michael Schumacher Museum last year.
Awesome.
And we allowed a live audience there.
Yeah.
So we had Lando Norris come in as well, so people with premium tickets could visit him. So it got more people in as well. People have travelled from all across Europe to come to this as well. But yeah, that noise, that I don't know. For me as a commentator, it just puts goosebumps on me, because you think
it did. It scared me almost.
People care as much as I do.
Yes.
Like I've actually got people I could talk about with this now. You know, you're not
Yes.
just on your own thinking, God, I love that. Oh, who can I tell? Who can I text? Like none of my real friends really understand it. They're like, oh, you nerd, it's a game. But I'm like, there's actually people out there that care. So we're actually talking sim racing in general now, me and you as just fans, which is great. I love
which I'm happy to talk about.
Of course, man, of course. And
I was ridiculed because around the Gran Turismo 2 or 3, I started to see, I was like 14 or 15 at the time. I started to see, no, I was a little bit older, 16-ish. I started to see that, hang on a second, I can use my PlayStation to train for the real thing. I didn't have money to go testing in my kart. I had no money for that stuff. And I lived so far away from the racetrack that I couldn't actually get there either, especially because I was too young to drive a car. So I figured, okay, well, my friends who live near the racetrack, while they actually go real practice, I will spend time in the gym, but I'll also do time I didn't call it a simulator. I called it a PlayStation game. And I'll learn racing lines at different racetracks and overtaking techniques. And I was laughed all the way from the age of 16 until I was 30 years old, maybe even 31, 32. It's only been the last 3 years where it's been common or acceptable to talk about sim racing as a decent crossover to real racing. But for the longest time, I was laughed at as the only driver who would even consider to use a game to practice for real life. So I don't think the crossover will ever disappear entirely. In fact, now it's becoming more and more, would you say, pervasive?
Yeah.
And I would also argue that Gran Turismo is guilty of creating this culture, because they were the first ones to dedicate who knows how much money into proving that there was a crossover with the GT Academy. So esports should stand on its own. And to be honest with you, when I sent out this tweet, I didn't actually factor that in properly enough in my head. Even though I know it to be true, I still because I lean so much on sim racing to improve as a real racing driver. I mean, I stopped racing for 7 years to try save up enough money to give it one more shot. I purposefully stopped racing so I could be a racing driver again one day. But during that time, I used sim racing to stay sharp. And when I came back, I was not instantly on the pace, but I was on-ish the pace, if you will. Thanks to sim racing, thanks to R Factor and to Gran Turismo.
Absolutely. Like, I completely agree with you in that respect. Like, we're seeing now more and more people have the opposed opinion from you who are in the real world of motorsport. The iRacing series having like $300,000 is scaring real drivers. Like, it is the fear, I think, more than anything. Of
Absolutely.
Potentially, karting has always been the... by the way, just before I forget, you sound so much like Kevin Peterson. It's ridiculous.
Some people have said that to me. Kevin Peterson on YouTube.
You basically are Kevin Peterson.
Come on, guys.
Maybe a little bit better looking.
Oh, thank you. He is taller though. He's much taller.
He's a tall
But I'm
man.
lighter, so I must be faster.
But you've seen a lot of real drivers come out, and it's because karting has been that, to be a real driver, you have to come through karting. Like, that's the only way it's possible,
Yeah.
or have daddy put you in a car.
I'm getting ridiculed for saying that. Forget karting. Because
this is the new
go sim racing.
this is the
Do
new
10
entry
races a day.
level. This is the new
Yes.
entry level. Like, and
Yes.
so I was speaking to James Baldwin yesterday, Veloce James. He's the
Yes.
world's fastest gamer.
Yes,
And
yes.
So he raced in Formula Ford,
Yes.
and he said he was petrified of the car. He just never really got to grips with it. And then over the last sort of 3 years, he's been sim racing. He's the world's fastest gamer, for Christ's sake. And he got back into that Formula Ford 3 years later, and he said it was just the difference in his mentality, in his mindset. His talent had increased from what he was telling me. And it's just
methodology,
because of
everything.
seat time. Just
Yeah.
seat time. Whether you do, if someone does 3 hours on a track in that car, it is still no comparison to doing 30 hours on a sim.
Of course, because the sim is there to develop muscle memory. And of course, you get to the real thing and you have to overcome the fear. That's normal. And you have to start to dial into your muscle memory the dynamics of the weight transfer. That's the scary part. Because in the game, when the rear steps out, you just counter steer. But in real life, you're like, damn, this thing is heavy and it's coming around. You just hope you can catch it. But the fundamentals, the things that I use sim racing for these days is for deliberate practice, practicing something that I feel is wrong in my braking technique because of my ankle movement or my steering inputs, or when I get nervous in the sim. Like, the best thing that I find the sim for is to manage my emotions, because in real life you have distractions, physical distractions, G-force, heat, tiredness, all those things which mask your nervous reaction to a situation. In the sim, and Montoya said this the other day, he said his heart rate was jacked when he won that competition. You don't feel that in real racing, but you can feel it in the sim and start to be like, okay, at what point am I getting nervous? How do I react? What part of my body's getting tense? How can I tune that out? How can I practice being nervous? And how do I practice being better at being nervous? I know we've gone off topic here, but maybe it goes to emphasize my passion for sim racing, I suppose.
Yeah, I think we genuinely need to do just a general sim racing, real world motorsport comparison, like just a general podcast with you, David. To be honest, just talking about you and what you do and your experiences within sim racing, my experiences, and just getting to know you a little bit better. I think that would be probably the best idea. Otherwise, this podcast is going to last for about 5 hours.
Yeah, it will. Yeah, we can end it here.
Yeah, to sum up, basically, obviously, there was a lot of backlash on Twitter in regards to what you said about the event. I think it's a misconception, especially from my side. I completely agree with you. I don't believe that it should fall onto the organisers to be putting prize money on. I think the teams should be compensating their drivers. I don't think we're quite at that point for that to be a realistic goal at this point in time. I do feel that
let's be honest, just quickly, is a lot of the teams rely on the prize money to actually pay their drivers, right?
Oh god, yeah. There's been some stories come to light recently, actually, of exploitation and stuff, and with anything.
I've been accused of not knowing the industry, but I'd speak to a lot of sim racing drivers. I understand the contracts that they sign are absolute shockers in some cases, and I'm not singling out any particular racing team, but I'm like, if anything needs to be fixed, it needs to be the exploitation of drivers to put in this level of effort across multiple sims, and they're only getting a less cut of the prize money, or whatever the case may be.
I think that's the correct word. I think that's what people were trying to allude to, was that they believe GT Sport are exploiting drivers because they're the talent and they're the only ones not being paid. When, again, I don't think that's the case at all. You're right, they get these amazing experiences. They get an opportunity to boost their profile post-event as well. So, yeah, I guess it's... A lot of people want to get their opinion in like a 10-minute space when this tweet hit, and it was hard to really for everybody to get their opinion in without being able to explain it unless they start a thread that's about 400 tweets long.
Look, I've been thinking about this for longer than when I tweeted it. I put a lot of thought into what I was going to write, and if someone's just come back with a 10 minutes reactionary reply, I don't take it personally. I'm like, I'm sure if I spoke to him, we'd probably land on the same thing. And I started to learn through the reactions that people thought I was saying that sim racers don't deserve to earn money because it took me 18 years to earn money. That's not what I meant. I meant it takes long to earn money in a profession
Yeah.
such as this.
Well,
And
some of the replies were just, for the lack of a better term, idiots. Like, you get that on the internet, that's fine.
oh, sure. I was
most
lucky
people-
that because I
people
ran a
built
tech
it up
company, I
nicely.
was exposed to trolls
Oh,
from
God,
day one.
yeah.
And my brother is like the chief troll officer. I always joke. I'm like well armed for trolls. I don't mind it. I don't mind it. Some of them are
everyone's
sometimes
entitled
right.
to an opinion. Well, yeah, but there's a way of writing things at the end of the day.
Of course.
You're not.
I didn't take it personally. And I
No.
know why. I could see why my tweet would be taken personally because I know a lot of people dedicate a shit ton of time to this.
Yeah.
But so do I in my profession. And even when I came back to racing, I was quite literally skipping meals because I couldn't afford to eat because all my money was going to traveling to the next race or trying to pay the previous race. So when guys say to me, I just don't have sympathy for people who say, well, it's going to take more work. I'm like, well, I don't know what to say to that besides cry me a river, because this does take a lot of work, because what we're trying to pursue here is so out of the social norm. To be a professional racing driver or to be a sim racing driver, which is a professional sport or whatever, you have to beat thousands and thousands and thousands of people who want your seat. And it takes so much more effort to be better than the person next to you. That's what will define whether you become a professional or not.
God, I got so many questions about your life. I really have. But no, I completely agree with you. In my response to that, I was probably wrong. But I have my reasons. I think I've explained my reasons today as well.
And I completely understand them. No one here is wrong, except for the obligation of the organizer to produce prize money. I'm like, well, maybe they can produce prize money. But then should they pay for your flight as well to be there? What else would you like?
Yeah, I think it's an expectation. The expectation of it is wrong. I think. I think the want for it is
justifiable.
Justifiable.
Who doesn't
yeah.
want prize money?
Exactly
I understand
that. I can
I
understand
do
the
understand
community, and I will fight. I will bat for this community all day long, no problem at all. But yeah, it's just I think it's just a way things were worded, etc., etc., etc. All of that usual social media stuff. I would love to hear people's responses to this in the comments, and maybe we could do a follow-up on this at some point in the future, David.
That would be fantastic.
With people's opinions. Maybe I should have asked this before this to get people's questions and stuff in, but yeah, it's just I think it was just really vital that we got your insight into your tweet, and you explain it with your mouth opposed to Twitter, so people can understand. And I think you've given a great account of what you believe, and yeah, you've definitely swayed me in some of it. And again, I will stick by some of my points as well. But
Absolutely.
To summarise, I still think that it's a separate entity, and I think we need to break the stigma of what has come before, which is real world motorsports. That's the only thing we can really look at as a model, and it might be worth just straying away from it. The way that the top end of motorsport works, as you're involved, it is a bit of a, for the lack of a better term, sometimes a shit show. Like, there's people that just shouldn't be there.
It's a massive gamble on your life.
Yeah.
And I did have to gamble my life. And I don't expect anyone to take the risks that I had to take to become a racing driver, because it's reckless. But I still don't see sim racing getting even close to the level that I had to go through to become professional. So because I see it as a slightly easier path, nothing is easy at this level. I took offense, and I will be honest, it shocked me how few, when people said that more than 50% of them don't want to become real racing drivers, because that hasn't been my experience so far when speaking to sim racers. So I'm guilty of making one or two assumptions which were definitely wrong. I thought more of you wanted to become real racers.
That's only from your experience. So when you've only met the top end of the sim racing spectrum, like if you were going to take a proper consensus of this, or a proper census of this, you've met the top drivers on GT Sport, like the casual sim racer. They're just there to be sim racers. And like,
okay, so those guys I also know, because I even built a website around Gran Turismo which had 10,000 members, and I remember the guys would complain because they couldn't bold their text in the forums. That really frustrated me. But anyway,
sorry, where did that come from?
Because I programmed the thing from scratch on my own. It was the primary reason for it was to be a lap time leaderboard so that I could tell if I was the world's best Gran Turismo 4 driver. And at the time, there was nothing around. Prior to that, there was a website called GT3 Times, and there was, of course, GT Planet. GT Planet almost bought my website when I was 22 or 3, but because I used a different code base, they couldn't integrate it into GT Planet. And I raced under a pseudonym back then. I didn't race as David Perel. I'm fully aware of the casual sim racer, and I coach. I do sim racing coaching every single day, up to 3 to 6 lessons per day with the casual sim racer. But I never saw those guys as the guys who wanted to become world champions, because most of them that I coach have regular jobs and can't make the level of sacrifice required to be a world champion. So
But that's
again,
so this is my point. So that's my point. Like with anything, everybody starts somewhere.
yeah,
Like, so before you've ever got onto a sim racing game or anything, you've got no experience at all, so you have no expectations. But
right.
that's what every world champion has come from that point.
Yes, that is true. 100%.
Yeah.
100%. I'm so glad that we had this conversation. And I've known Actual Vision for a long time. I downloaded some of your podcasts on my phone, and it's actually an honor to be on here. So I appreciate it, and thank you for taking the time.
I really appreciate you being on here. You've given a great account of yourself, and you've explained yourself very, very well. I wish I was a little bit better, guys. I don't know why I struggled today, but I've been perplexed by having David on here. But again, thank you so much for being on. And I feel we need to do something a little bit more just general in sim racing in the future as well, because I think we could probably talk for hours on that subject.
I could talk for weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Also,
I'm sitting at my rig right now to have this conversation.
Amazing. Also, we might be able to sort something out with you in terms of my website. So I'll talk to you about that afterwards. If you wanted to host some sort of not championship, but some sort of challenge to beat you or something like that.
The irony of my argument is that if I do have a competition, I was actually thinking of doing like a coach day of competition or tournament. It's going to have prize money.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, but I don't feel obligated. It's just because I'm not Gran Turismo. How else do I incentivize people?
No, you should be putting prize money. You have to.
I know.
That's a fact.
Yeah. Well,
brilliant.
I'll use your entry fee to pay for the prize money. But then it's gambling, I think. Isn't there a law around? We need to understand something else about Gran Turismo. First of all, there's the Japanese culture around them. You've seen how they respond.
As well as a problem.
Yes, I believe that there's a problem there. So it could just be a technicality. They do not respond to their critics. They never have.
They've got no reason.
Very happily. But I still think morally there's no obligation. It's just, if you want to be a Gran Turismo World Champion, here's the framework. Operate that framework. If you don't want to enter it, well, there's tons of other competitions where you can become a world champion. So, on different topics, of course, and win prize money.
For sure.
But yeah, there you go.
There we go, ladies and gentlemen. That is David Perel for you. Hopefully, it's been a little bit of an insight into the discussion we've had on Twitter. So it did cause a bit of a shitstorm this week, that's for sure. And
My God.
It's been cleared up. That's one way of getting some followers, David, I tell you. Fair play to you.
I think I lost followers.
Oh, did you?
I think so.
Oh, no.
But I wasn't trying to do a popularity thing.
No,
Same with the Fraga Hizeld incident. I was like, well, this is my opinion. I need to share it from my perspective. And that also upset quite a few people.
Well, in my opinion, I think the most important thing within social media or within just being a person is integrity. And if you're not going to be honest with anybody else or honest all the time, then there's no point. So you've been honest, you've come out there, you've thrown yourself out there, and yeah, the response wasn't great on Twitter, but I feel like this is going to clear up a lot of people's concerns. And well, again, you need to let us know in the comments section below as to whether this has cleared a lot of things up. Any questions you have as well, be sure to ask, and we'll probably, if there's a want for it, if there's a need for it, we'll probably do a follow-up on this subject maybe, and then transition it into general sim racing. But David, thank you so much for being on, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. It's the first time I've talked to you as well, and yeah, it's been awesome.
Guys, absolute pleasure. Thanks for the time.
So there you go, guys. Make sure you do indeed leave the comments in the comment section, liking this stuff and share it and all that. I'm not very good at YouTube, but you know what I mean anyway. So anyway, take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.